I wanted to remind you that you are in listen-only mode. That means your phones are muted. But if you have a question, you can, or even you can use the chat box feature or the comment section there on the right-hand side of your screen. The session, as I said, is being recorded, and we will be sending it out in the next few days, along with the PDF of the PowerPoint presentation that you will see shortly. So today is the first of 4 webinars in a series of making the business case for culture change. And today, kicking off our series, is Lisa McCracken. Lisa is the Director of Senior Living Finance, Research and Development with Ziegler, where Lisa conducts market research and trend analyses. I'm so impressed in reading your bio, Lisa, and it's very obvious you've got an incredible amount of experience and expertise in conducting research in the not-for-profit sector, senior living sector. And in fact, many of you on the phone may have read some of the white papers that Lisa has generated or articles on various industry topics. Today, Lisa has graciously agreed to provide an overview of the key trends and innovations in elder care. I think now more than ever, there's a lot going on in the industry, and I can't think of a better person to really kick off our series. And Lisa, we are thrilled and honored to hear your presentation today.
Thank you. Glad to be a part of it. So welcome, everyone. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. So I'm Lisa McCracken, very excited to be spending the next 55 minutes or so with you. As was mentioned, don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll try to allow some time, certainly at the end, for that. But if I hit on a hot topic or just something that you had an interesting observation or curiosity about, put it in the chat box. I'll do my best to pay attention to those throughout. But if we need to come back to them at the end, we certainly will. So the real purpose of this is to do, what I often will say is the mile wide, inch deep. So when you talk about trends in elder care or senior services, there's so many different avenues that you could go down, from technology to cost of care to staffing to the resident demographics and changing older adults. So we're going to touch on a lot of those today, but just know we're not necessarily going to do a deep dive into any one of those. If at the end of this you say, gosh, I would really like to learn more about this thing or that thing, that Lisa touched on, don't hesitate to reach out and I'll be glad to follow up, because the reality is each one of these topics in and of themselves are an entire webinar. So we're going to jump in here. I want to just start off with just some brief background about the firm that I'm fortunate to be a part of. So I am the Director of Senior Living Research and Development with Ziegler. Ziegler is a 116-year-old company. We celebrated our 115th anniversary last year. We are an employee-owned company. We were started in Wisconsin, are still headquartered in the Midwest. Our headquarters are in Chicago, but we are a national practice. We are, specifically as it relates to senior living, older adults, we are one of the nation's leading underwriters for financing for not-for-profit senior living providers. We also do a good bit of work actually on the for-profit private sector as well, particularly with merger acquisition activity. But so our national practice, I count on them and my team and colleagues to really help beef up our portfolio of research items and educational things that we distribute out. And now Susan referenced our white papers and different things that we will have out there as articles. So just know that is available to just help advance all of our understanding of what is happening in this very busy world. So that's a little bit about Ziegler. My background: I've been the head of research with Ziegler for the last 4.5 years, but have spent almost 20 years in the senior living industry, and I'm excited to share with you some of my learnings and observations as we go through this presentation. In terms of a bit of a brief outline, these are going to be the 4 categories, if you will, that we will touch on throughout the webinar. The first section, we're going to touch on what I call knowing your customer. So we're going to wrestle a little bit with how are you defining your customer, pull out some of those different stakeholder groups and just identify some of the trends and changes that we're seeing. How is the sector changing? So in section 2, we're going to talk about growth. Where are we seeing evolution and growth? Where are we seeing some plateauing potentially? And how are different service providers and seniors housing options behaving a little differently? Because I tell you, we are seeing some different things, and particularly one of the lines in the sand that we take a look at is sort of the before and after the recession, because the space looks a little different, and who some of the players are and so forth. Disruptors and catalysts, we could spend so much time on that, but we really need to talk about the dynamic environment and what are all the pressures that everybody's facing. So this may be a little bit of you're not alone once we hit that section, but it's, again, just increasing awareness around all of those catalysts. They're not all, areas of concern, but many of those can be catalysts for some real innovation and some exciting changes. Then the senior living capital markets is going to be very brief, but at the end of the day, it's that is the core of what we do. But the question begs itself is, how do people fund growth? What does the availability of capital look like? I'm going to touch ever so briefly on what the climate is right now post the tax bill. So now that we are into 2018, because I know many of us were very busy in November and December advocating for making sure that there were not some restrictions coming through, particularly for taxes and financing. So we'll talk briefly about that. So that's the general outline. And again, you'll see we're going to touch on a number of different topics here. So first, starting off with knowing your customer. And I will say I use that term customer. That sounds very business-like, right? It's important to know that by that, there's many terms that fall into that. It could be resident, it could be client, it could be patient, it could be customer. So it's really going to depend on your audience. I know we have a very diverse audience on this call. So I think we'll just use that term generally to represent the different stakeholder groups that you work with. So we like to start off when we do these trends presentations with a reminder of the demographics. So I think it's not a surprise to anyone who is on this call that the U.S. population is aging, and so much of that is attributed to the baby boomers. So we know that roughly 10,000 individuals a day are turning 65. And that's because of the significant aging of the boomer population and the volume of that cohort. So this graph just teases out the 65, the 75, 75 and up, 80 and up, and 85 and up. And again, it's a reminder of, okay, that's where we are. And, we like to do this as well because sometimes, you think time moves a little slower than it does. You think, oh, well, we hear a lot of people say, oh, we have so much time yet until the baby boomers are coming through our doors. But things tend to move sometimes in terms of like new development, new initiatives, new programs, adjusting policies and so forth, quicker than you think. And then, time goes by and you don't want to be set in a point where you're not prepared for any changes that are coming forth. So I want you to take a mental image of this as well, because we're going to talk about some of the growth in terms of the different options for seniors. And a lot of the evolution really took place to the left of that red line, to the left of We Are Here prior to 2018. And certainly we're seeing new models come about and continued innovation. But I would say that we're in a big period of scale. So where, in 1980, or even in the 70s, let's say a decade prior to that, a CCRC or life plan community concept still would have been evolving and maturing. Here we are in 2018 where, that's a much more mature product, and, it's just building out that inventory. We're seeing a lot of that around memory care. We're going to talk about the growth in that sector, assisted living and so forth. So again, I will just end on this slide with reminding everyone that this is pretty widely known. When we're out with boards and different leadership teams among seniors housing providers and senior living organizations, we say this is not our little secret. All you have to do is read the headlines any day and you see new players getting into the aging spectrum. So solutions around aging, whether it's Google saying we're going to tackle this, or different just groups that you've never heard of and are not traditional, let's say healthcare or senior services providers that are taking a look at this and saying we potentially have a role in that. So again, I introduced this section, said, do you know who your customers are? And there's a point of including this, and so much of it has to do with, today's response, I would say, is much more diverse than in decades past. And in particular, I want to call attention to two different groups. So, we're here talking about elder care. We're here talking about seniors, older adults. So they are naturally going to be a stakeholder group in terms of our customer. That is the staff group. And particularly today, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes more about some of the pressures, but there are a lot of conversations and solutions and brainstorming right now going on around staff retention, recruitment. There are definitely staff shortages, a lot in the healthcare, direct care staff positions, but if you talk to any senior housing or senior living provider, they would say it's really across the board and not just unique to those caregiving type of roles. So when you think about who your customer is and what you want your brand to be and who you are marketing to, whether you are a home health agency or whether you are a retirement community or have independent living housing, it is not only the older adult, but it is that employee. Again, we're going to get into some statistics here around turnover, the cost of turnover for sure, and we'll get a little bit more into this. But we like to follow this slide up with take two. So we say, okay, who is your customer? So this is going to be our entree into a little bit of the trend. So yes, we're going to stereotype here a little bit. We talk a lot about the boomers. If there are any boomers on the phone or listening in, I'm sure you didn't all dress like this in the past or even today. But clearly there are two segments getting a lot of attention. So you've got the boomers. And again, we talked about numbers when I showed that graph, but there are many attributes, preferences, just different characteristics of that segment that are very different than previous generations. Now, you may be feeling that and having that experience, certainly in terms of the adult children of potentially maybe your patients or your customers, but they're going to redefine aging. And we're going to talk about that. I have a slide here that's going to prompt us on a few things with that. And then the millennial workforce. And I think sometimes the millennials get a bad rap, just as, everybody assumes that the boomers were wild hippies back in the day. But the reality is this is a big part of the workforce of the future. And they do have different ways of how they define loyalty and what they get excited about in terms of passion, as it relates to professional ambitions and so forth. So it's really important to be thinking smart about how can we attract millennials. And I will tell you, particularly for an industry that elder care, older adults sometimes gets a bad rap. It's not always the sexiest industry to come and work into. There really, as all of you know, I'm preaching to the choir because many of you are in the industry and in the sector, but great opportunities for young professionals to enter. So we're going to talk a little bit about the millennials, but it's really important to identify just how they prefer their work environment. Even the recruitment process is very different these days. Filling out a 10-page application and waiting for 3 weeks to get back to somebody and having them back for several different interviews, they're gone. You're going to lose that millennial prospect. So these are two groups that we wanted to, in the take two slide here, make sure we called attention to as it relates to trends impacting our sector. So we talk about the changing consumer, and a lot of this slide really is around, again, the boomer. And we just need to remind ourselves that all of this happens over time. So it's not like we wake up tomorrow and the boomer has arrived and everything's just completely different. Some of the different things that I'm going to touch on here, we've been really evolving, I would say, in this respect, some slower than others, but evolving as it relates to many of these over a number of years. I'm going to touch on some things like name changes. We talk about resident involvement. 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have a ton of residents on boards, on the not-for-profit boards. Today, it's very common. So, these are types of things, again, I think a lot of this is a matter of degree. It's not like yesterday no one was transparent and tomorrow you are, but I think it's just a matter of, like I said, degree. So what are some changes that we're going to see in place? Obviously, just, redefining the status quo. So I will tell you, one example of that is really vernacular. And I know for the title of this webinar, we used the word elder care. There's a lot of debate on the correct terminology. Is it senior? Is it older adult? Is it elder? And there's a great deal of differences in terms of receptivity among the boomers of how palatable certain terms are. So the one clear example in the senior living industry has been the transition and recommendation of going from continuing care retirement community to life plan community. And because we know one of the things that does not resonate well with boomers is retirement, is the word care. If you are portraying a perception of, come here when you're frail and elderly and we'll take care of you, that's not going to be a great selling point. So it's where can you position yourself as living and vibrant. Wellness platforms are a big, big thing, and they need to not just be lip service. We see a very clear differentiation in communities and organizations that have a solid wellness platform and very much have adopted that culture versus those that their curb appeal, their names, the look and feel, the culture just signifies old, sleepy, and a thing of the past, to be honest with you. So it's keeping up on top of things like that. I mentioned name changes. That's one of the lists that Ziegler keeps. We keep a track of all the different name changes. So what we're seeing is terms like homes, aging, things like that being replaced with, examples of, Presbyterian Retirement Communities of the Northwest is now transforming age. You have so many examples like that. If anybody's ever curious in that list, we have it. If you're going through that conversations within your organization now, they're always interesting conversations, but we have some information and some white papers to give you some resources for that. But all that's driven by the changing consumer. So it's making sure that you are relevant in the future. So, the boomers want to be self-directed, and, more of an engaged consumer in their healthcare. They want choices. They want options. If this is the only dining and meal plan you have, and these are when your activities are, and this is the only contract type, take it or leave it, that's going to put you in a difficult position. Do you need to be the end-all, be-all and have, 20 different types of contracts and, 10 different entree choices at night? No, you don't. But having that flexibility and having them tell you, what their preference and needs are, as opposed to you telling them, here's, what we have, and you select. Involvement, again, I referenced being on boards, regulatory. We definitely are seeing many more vocal resident associations getting involved in the regulatory environment. And, I would say, again, that's not a new thing, but in terms of the voice and the level of activity, we see that increase. The one thing I'm going to touch on briefly here, the needs will be different. So all of the data and the research on the baby boomer cohort shows that when it comes to many of those key health indicators, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, they are not looking as favorable as previous generations. The mental health is a real issue, addiction. One thing that we're seeing organizations and providers really do is bring in some specialists as it relates to the mental health. And I'm not just talking memory impairment. Clearly, we're seeing increases in the dementia and Alzheimer's, but anxiety, depression, the baby boomers have significantly higher rates of those ailments than some previous generations. And so how are you adjusting your assessments? How are you maybe providing some support services and having staff appropriately trained? And then addiction, one of the unfortunate things that we're seeing coming through with the boomer generation is addiction to painkillers and prescription medications and so forth. So something to be aware of. The one good thing that we are seeing is that Cigarette smoking is less likely, less prominent in the baby boomers than some previous generations. So, back in the day when everyone was struggling with their smoke-free campus policies and getting pushback, that's a no-brainer today, and honestly, very much expected for most prospective customers. Technology, we're going to touch on that in a little bit, but clearly that is changing how we do business. Then the final thing I'm just going to mention on here, and then we're going to move on, is, how much has that, boomer cohort saved for their retirement? And, there's clearly a proportion at the top that has the funds and are in good shape, but there is a significant, what we'll call middle market, older adult and boomer that does not have the same amount of savings as previous generations. So, what are going to be the options when they need some care or support? So this is one of the common things that providers are really wrestling with and saying, how can we have something that hits that middle market, whether it's a seniors housing option, a home care option that is within their means. Mentioning cost of care, if any of you have gone to the Genworth website, it's Genworth Financial, you will see that this report is on here. It is definitely worth checking out. The Genworth website, you can go on, they release a cost of care report every year. This is data from the 2017 survey. You can go on that website and you can drill down statistics for your state, for certain regions and markets within the state. So it's really helpful not only to see where your cost is versus some others, but, if you're a consumer and you're saying, gosh, what are my options and what am I looking at in terms of cost, it's a really good report. But the helpful thing for, folks like us is to say, okay, what are these increases looking like? And you can see here on this slide that between 2016 and 2017, the cost of care continued to significantly go up. So we all know that the cost of care in private paid skilled nursing room is among the most costly alternatives. Went up by 5.5% over 1 year. And then the table on the side just shows what the national averages are for that. But the least costly alternative, home health or home care services, increased as well, and even by a greater proportion, so by more than 6%. And I included this slide not only to talk about the cost of care, but this increase touches very clearly on two key trends that we're seeing. One is the labor piece, which I talked about. So providers and senior services folks are very much seeing increased labor costs. And again, whether that's a home care agency, hospice agency, whether we're talking about nursing staff in a nursing home, and some of this has to do, again, with retention, minimum wage increases. So labor is the number one driver of cost these days for any provider. And we just did a survey that we'll be releasing the report on next week, and this is pretty much number one in terms of concerns for organizations. And then the acuity of short stay patients. So these are the rehab, individuals that come out of the hospital and have a brief stint in a skilled nursing facility for some temporary rehab. I'm going to get back to this, but we know that we are seeing a higher acuity, more complex individuals who are coming in. Those that are less complex are going right home and skipping skilled nursing altogether. So the individuals that you have are of higher acuity, and in turn, they demand a different type of staff treatment, correct? So you need to have staff that are trained in those more complex cases. So whether it's wound management, PICC lines, all types of things like that. So this is a nice slide that really brings together the cost of care and then some of the pressures that we're seeing in skilled nursing and in labor. Top 6 occupations and jobs in demand between 2014 and 2024. 4 of these 6 are in healthcare. So you can see you've got personal care aides, registered nurses, home health aides, nursing assistants. So this is the number of new jobs that are projected by 2024. The other thing that I put on there is the minimum wage. One of the things that is difficult, and we recognize in terms of organizations that money doesn't grow on trees. The government's only reimbursing so much, and it's not like that goes up significant amounts every year. And generally, for many organizations, there's a shortfall in terms of what it costs to provide the care and what the government reimbursed. But one of the challenges is when you look at a median wage of that level, you have many of these specialty positions in personal care aides or nursing assistants that you're competing with Target, dining establishments, retail, for quite frankly, fairly similar wages. And again, some of that has to do with, depending state by state and city by city, increases in minimum wage. The final thing I'm going to just touch on here, and it's in the text at the bottom, we are definitely hearing organizations that are saying, gosh, we're running into situations where, the staff cannot afford to live in the neighborhood or in a reasonable proximity to where our community or our facility is. So we have providers that are offering transportation. I will tell you, in the last year, it's for the first time we've heard organizations talk about housing for staff on site. So something to pay attention to, again, something that we're hearing, but clearly labor is one of those things that are keeping organizations and providers up at night. And it's also impacting growth. At the end of the day, if you cannot staff what you want to build or what you want to expand upon, you're not going to be able to do it. So we included some quotes here. This is one, Dan Ogus from Human Good, that just referenced it. I'm not going to read through word for word, but there's all of these issues surrounding talent that really will impact providers' ability to execute on their plans for growth. And then we also have another quote from Sarah Beth Hansen here from Harvard Retirement. Again, similar around attracting employees and with growth. I had a provider recently, in recent weeks, have to just say, we used to staff to census, and now we're in a reverse situation where we are having to adjust our census based on staff. I didn't include it here, but we did a survey about a year and a half ago, and we want to repeat it again in 2018, where we asked have you ever had to turn away admissions because of staffing? And at that time, again, a year and a half ago, it was about 16% said yes. Now I'm sure that there are some that should have turned people away and didn't, so we can assume that number is probably a little higher. But the bottom line is, this also translates into dollars, into money, if you need to shut down wings and units, even if it's temporary because you can't staff them. This is just on the cost of staff turnover. I'm not going to spend much on this, but we know that it's increasingly more expensive if you want to, it's smarter to spend some money up front to retain that individual than to pay for the cost of the turnover. The one thing that I will just share before we wrap up on this topic with best practices is, it's interesting. I've done some traveling in the past week just to some different providers and meetings and conferences, and I saw even a headline to this effect a few days ago. But one of the things that came up 3 times this week for me was people indicating interest in recruiting staff from Puerto Rico. So we are seeing some individuals and organizations say, can we maybe look for caregiving staff outside of, the 50 states and, potentially see what our options might be. So best practices, partnering, the reality is we're not going to solve this alone. So whether you're partnering with colleges, universities, partner with one another. You may be competitors on the resident or patient side or client side, but, how can you work together to educate even high school students and young college students about senior services as a field for a lifelong profession? So we know Leading Age has some a workforce solutions that's identifying best practices. Argentum is doing a lot around this, ASHA. So we know that many of the national associations are working hard at this as well. Okay, so we're going to wrap up on the customer. I want to go into just senior living growth trends. And I will tell you that, and again, I hope that this isn't simplifying things, but I know that we have, again, a wide variety of individuals that are in attendance here today. So when we talk about senior living growth, I will tell you that it really depends on what you are, what type of agency you are, what type of seniors housing you are, as to how you're behaving or growing and expanding right now or not. So we have that graphic up there in front of you that just separates that. You've got the not-for-profit sector, which is heavily on like the life plan communities, the CCRCs. You've got the private sector, so that would be maybe for-profit owned, although you have some publicly owned companies like some of the REITs. You've got bricks and mortar, housing, and then you also have the services. So again, it's a wide variety of topics that we're talking about here. So while some might be growing, others may be shrinking a little bit, and others may be holding their own. It's fairly stable. So again, where we saw a lot of the differences was really post-recession, coming out of the recession and how organizations were behaving. This is a very busy slide, and I just want to break down a couple key points. One of the most common questions I get asked is, Lisa, how many facilities are there out there? And how many seniors are accessing service in any one day? Well, the reality is you have to break it down, and there's not one magical number. And this slide looks very different than it would have, 50 years ago. We have another slide that I didn't include in here, but it's the entire continuum of choices. As every decade goes by, we have more sort of subsegments of housing options or services. And there's a number that I don't have on here. I don't have the continuing care at home on here. I don't have PACE programs. Those are also, options and things that are growing in popularity. But you can see some numbers here. The gray highlighted are more the services in someone's own home. The green are the housing options. And again, they're each owned and managed a little differently, and their growth has very much changed and behaved differently in the last 10, 15 years. We just have this rank from highest to lowest in terms of the percentage that are not-for-profit. That's what that NFP stands for. I referenced earlier that about 8 out of 10 life plan communities, that's again the sort of the modern day name for the CCRC, the continuing care retirement community, they are not-for-profit, sponsored by not-for-profits and managed by a not-for-profit organization. And then you can see accordingly as it goes down through there. So outside of life plan communities, the private sector, the for-profit sector is very heavily and pretty dominant. And again, some of that has shifted over the time. When you think of the origins of senior care, it started off as homes for widows and orphans. And then, things really, business models develop and things are brought to scale and just it changes. So I talk about behaving differently. This slide, again, is around not-for-profits. And I see I have a typo in the title there. I apologize for that. So, and that comes about, again, Ziegler does a lot of work in the not-for-profit senior living space. That's where a lot of our research is. But in recent years, the not-for-profit senior living space has been very active with, we say, repositioning. That's reinvesting in your community. And I'll show a slide that a lot of the dollars has been spent in the healthcare, so bringing that up to speed and having it be less institutional, more home-like. Expansions, affiliations, we are consolidating. It's not unique to senior services. It is happening. Just look at all the hospitals and health systems around you. There's a lot fewer today. And a lot more mergers than there were a number of years ago. Satellite campuses, I'm going to talk about HCBS. That's the home and community-based services. Joint ventures, partnerships. What's been down, and this is post-recession among not-for-profits, is new community locations. If we're talking about the for-profit private sector, that arrow would be up. So while the not-for-profits have really been reinvesting in what they have, with some growth of new campuses, but the pace has slowed down, the for-profits have been the opposite and very, very active with building out new locations. The one, I want to introduce this publication because I'm pulling some data from it, but this is a great document, particularly for those interested in understanding the not-for-profit sector. We release this every year. It's the Leading Age Ziegler 150 publication. It not only lists the largest 150 not-for-profit organizations, but it talks about every trend that we're touching on today: technology adoption, revenue around home and community-based services, number of FTEs per resident, things of that nature. Check it out. It is free. It's online at the Ziegler website. Leading Age has it posted as well. This will be our 15th year in 2018, and we're expanding it to the LZ 200. So check that out. It's got some really great trend information. If you're curious who the 25 largest not-for-profits are, this is the listing that you can see in front of you. And we just break down by total number of units. So you can see real quick who's heavy on the healthcare nursing care side, who's really heavy on independent living, and vice versa. There are similar lists out there. I know ASHA has their ASHA 50 list every year. That's a great one to take a look at. That's not just exclusive to not-for-profits. Argentum has a list that they release every year as well. So it's good to know who some of the larger players are in the space. So when I referenced a bit ago that particularly not-for-profits, which is that LZ 150 organization, have been very active with community expansions or repositioning, that's that top bar. So that is that, 3/4 of the organization's spending dollars and investment in that. New locations, only about a third. And you can see that it continues to actually even decline 2015, 16, and 17. And of that 32%, we estimate about 40% are new locations. The remaining 60% is growth through affiliations, which is where many providers are spending their time these days. So I referenced community expansions, repositionings. This is just what providers are doing. So these are seniors housing organizations that have skilled nursing. They may have assisted living, memory care, independent living. This is every Ziegler financed deal, and this is a lot from 2014 through mid-year 2017. And you can see here that the yellow or the greenish there is activity in skilled nursing. So a lot of expansion, repositioning skilled nursing. We do see a lot of adoption around household models, small house models, maybe the greenhouse model. Again, that more home-like atmosphere, getting away from the cinder block walls. We're seeing a lot of downsizing from semi-private to private rooms. So all of those changes. A lot of dollars in expanding memory care. So while the life plan communities are carving out memory support units, the for-profit private sector is building a good bit of assisted living and memory care. Look around your neighborhood and your county, your region, your city, and take note of the number of new assisted living and memory care facilities that have gone up in the last 10 years, and it's going to be notable. And then on the independent living side, a lot of that is in preparation for the boomer. Or, if you have the boomer, a number of the life plan communities have a good proportion of the boomers already living there. So it's, changing up the units. It's adding amenities. It may be wellness offerings. So this is just, where people are spending their dollars as it relates to the bricks and mortar and housing options. We get questions often, again, with life plan communities. That's the LPC. We do have the national database for life plan communities where we track all of them throughout the country. And these are openings of life plan communities from 1950 through today. And you can see we've got in the blue shades are those that are already open, and in the red and pink, that's projected. So obviously some of them have already opened, but those are also projections of what we know is in the works and will open by the end of 2019. Look at 1985 through 1989. Isn't that unbelievable how many new life plan communities opened during that 5-year period? We don't envision ever getting back to that again. We do envision that we will probably bounce back and have higher numbers than what you can see the slowdown in the recession. But because the market's built out, again, we're more mature, we're at a different stage, and we just don't anticipate seeing those numbers again. The dark blue is purpose-built, because we often get this question if I don't address it. Purpose-built means from ground up, we are going to build a life plan community or a CCRC. That is the intent. That is what it will be. The light blue, those are ones that their offerings evolved over time. So 9 times out of 10, it started off as a nursing home, and then they added on maybe some independent living cottages, added assisted living, and then over time, they are now a CCRC or life plan community. So that's just the difference between purpose-built and non-purpose-built. I referenced satellite campuses. This is a popular thing we're seeing among many particular life plan communities where they may not want to build out the full continuum. We referenced around the pressures in the post-acute skilled nursing, which again, we're going to get to here momentarily, but that is really causing a number of providers to say, if we build a new campus or a new facility or a new community, do we want to include that skilled nursing piece? How about this? How about we've got the retirement community out in the suburbs. Let's go downtown and have an urban independent living, maybe some assisted living units, but we're not going to offer healthcare there. If they need healthcare and skilled nursing, they can come back, they can have services at the main campus and so forth. So it's sort of like a a mothership type of thing where the satellite campus is getting some support services from the main larger campus, but does not offer the full suite of options and services that the other campus might. So we see that, and there's some provider examples there as well. I've referenced affiliations. The term we use in the not-for-profit world is sponsorship transitions. This is also merger acquisitions, a great deal of activity, dispositions, affiliations, acquiring other facilities. Bottom line, we're consolidating. The business has become more complex. It makes sense from a staffing standpoint in terms of having professional ladders for staff for people to climb. If you're a small organization, you're going to have higher turnover for those individuals that are looking to advance and to grow. So this has been a lot of activity for providers nationally. And why so much more today than in years past? Well, there are more pressure points out there. The complexities of healthcare. Healthcare reform has ushered in a new day. It's how people get paid. The bundled payments weren't around, 15 years ago. The ACOs, the just outcomes-based and value-based rather than, volume-based. Leadership turnover. Who are many of those, longtime CEOs that are retiring? Those baby boomers we're talking about, those are a lot of the leadership. And if you don't have a clear successor, we see many organizations that are saying, you know what, our CEO who's been here 40 years is retiring. We don't have a real key successor. We're a smaller single site organization. We may do a search, but we're also going to maybe explore affiliation at the same time. Technology demands, smaller organizations will even just say, I can't even afford to hire someone to be a chief technology officer to pay attention to all this stuff. So competition, all of these different pressures. And, the top two clearly in that bucket in terms of drivers are the complexity of healthcare and then the leadership turnover. This is a heat map. This is purely not-for-profit. We didn't list everything in the sector since 2010, but these are all not-for-profit communities, facilities that have changed hands from 2010 through September of 2017. You can see that there are certain areas that there's been greater activity. So I will tell you that there's been, now today that we're in February of 2018, we've had over 400 not-for-profit communities change hands and change owner, and about 65% of them have been not-for-profit dispositions and sales to the for-profit sector. So there's been a good bit of merger acquisition activity among private investors looking to purchase. And I will tell you that a ton of these dispositions have been on the nursing home side. Or if you're a life plan community or CCRC, it's the ones that tend to be heavier on the skilled nursing and healthcare. Not completely, not solely, but particularly those that have been to the for-profit space have been heavy on the healthcare and nursing. So we have a lot more statistics on this, and I've done a lot of writing on it, but we wanted to share this map with you today. Okay, we're now transitioning out of the bricks and mortar and into home and community-based services. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this, but the reality is there's so much that is happening here. We've seen so much growth and evolution as it relates to providing care for older adults that want to remain at home. And you can remain at home longer than you have been able to in the past. Technology has allowed you to do that. My goodness, you can hook on a monitor and, your physician can monitor you. And a lot of the telehealth solutions and remote monitoring, those have allowed individuals to really age in place more than in years past. So this is a listing, again, from the LZ 150 publication I referenced. These are the largest not-for-profit providers based on revenue as it relates to home community-based services. Each of these organizations is different. Some are heavy in hospice, some are heavy on home health, some have multiple PACE sites and programs, and it very much varies. I will tell you, and this is in the box to the right, that there are many, many organizations that dabble in this. 70% have revenues of less than 10 million. So, so this table here shows some of the larger organizations and platforms as it relates to HCBS, but it's not uncommon to have a home health or home care that, is bringing in maybe 2 million, 2 million. To grow this, I will tell you that there is, again, a lot of acquisition activity and consolidation we're seeing in this business as well. So to grow organically and start your own home health business and be competitive in an area can be tough. Not that it isn't doable, but there's a lot of competition out there, and many organizations are growing and agencies are growing through acquiring other agencies. It's a very common thing that we're seeing. Final thing is just on joint ventures. A lot of joint ventures and partnerships, particularly on the services front. So it's generally easier and there's less risk on the table partnering with someone, let's say with a hospice agency or home care. We see competing seniors housing providers come together and say, let's do this, home-based program together, or we'll create this new model together. At the bottom, I just have a couple different examples there, but you can see here the increase from 2013 through year-end 2016, and once we tally the 2017 data, we're sure that's going to go up as well. Final section before I spend just a couple minutes at the end just talking about the financing and the post-tax bills, disruptors and catalysts. So the one thing, and I've referenced this all throughout, is that's giving people heartburn is that post-acute space. So if you read any of the publications that are out there, whether it's the McKnights or the Senior Housing News or Provider, we know that occupancy in skilled nursing is among the lowest it's been. And so much of that is specifically, not that there maybe aren't some changes on the long-term skilled nursing side of things, but it's that short stay rehab. And again, just a lot of pressures, and it very much depends on your market. You need to know your market. Where there's been a lot of hospital consolidation, where it's a very heavily consolidated market, and generally the more urban markets, we're seeing a lot more pressures. Now, the rural providers have a whole other different set of pressures as well. But again, something that is really important to talk about when we talk about trends and a disruptor in the space. So, there are providers that are saying, what does the future of us in the continuum look like? So, what will our portfolio look like in the past? We've even seen some of the publicly traded REITs separate out their seniors housing portfolios from their healthcare, from their skilled nursing. Some of that is managing risk, but again, they're operating and behaving very differently, and the pressures on them are very different. So this slide and the next slide come from our Ziegler CFO Hotline series. All of those hotline reports are on our website, so if you're curious to know the different topics we cover, you can check that out. But this is a survey we did August of 2016, and again, this past August. Basically, we asked CFOs in senior living, we said, okay, are you experiencing any of the following? And you can see that, pretty much everybody's saying yes, we're seeing decreased length of stays in skilled care. So that's all about the drive for outcomes. So same quality of care, same outcomes, but in a shorter period of time. Patients with a higher acuity than in years past. I referenced that previously around, if you're a complex case, you may go in, but a simple knee replacement or hip replacement is going home with home health. Narrowing of networks, and then again, increase in consumers where treatment plans skip skilled care altogether. About half. We'll do this again in 2018, and I anticipate that the numbers will increase again. As it relates to planning, so this is particularly for providers that do offer, more than just skilled care. So they may have assisted living and skilled nursing. It may be, full life plan community with multiple levels of living. And we basically asked this on the survey. We said, what are your future plans? Are you looking to expand skilled nursing? My goodness, we're seeing this wave of boomers. They're all going to need care, right? So we need to prepare. Are you holding steady, or are you looking to decrease? You can see about 27% said that they're looking to reduce the number of skilled nursing beds. That's not uncommon. We are hearing that throughout the country. Again, can very much vary market to market, but 60% at this point said we're not looking to make any changes, not grow or reduce, but a sizable proportion are looking to change that. And I would say a lot of those are the ones that are very heavy skilled nursing compared to independent living, assisted living, and memory care. I referenced occupancy earlier. This is information that NIC tracks. For those of you who aren't familiar with NIC, they are a great resource for data and information on seniors housing and care. You do have to have a subscription for most of their reports, but their skilled nursing data report is out there for individuals to have and access. Encourage you to go on and check it out. It's really great information. They also have data and information on payer mix and how that has changed as well. So great report. Go check it out and familiarize yourself with NIC. Technology, we could talk about this forever, but if you think the driverless cars and the voice recognition are a thing for the future, no, they are here. If any of you saw the headlines, the Villages down in Florida, which obviously is a very large senior complex for housing, they are having driverless cars. And we know that there are a number of companies that are trying out the driverless cars on retirement community campuses because, again, it's relative to being out, let's say, on the general street or highway, it's easy to program and to adapt the technology. Robots, just check out the activity in Japan with robots. Very common for that to be a solution for seniors, whether it's, reminders or, honestly, even some companion services. There are some robot animals that are out there that have shown some promising outcomes and results in treating and working with individuals who have some dementia or Alzheimer's. So this is transforming the future and how we do business, everything from care of residents to operational efficiencies to staffing to caregiver communication and family member communication. So pretty cool to pay attention to that. I do want to mention that Ziegler is excited that we have a fund that the investors are senior living providers, and we have pulled resources to invest in companies that have solutions around aging. So these are some of the companies at the bottom there that were a part of our first fund. We are wrapping up our second fund now, but tons of great learning that's going on there, some pretty cool pilots, and it's fascinating to watch the growth in this space and the number of new companies that are emerging every single day with solutions. Again, that very first graph that I showed you around the aging population, there are a lot of entrepreneurs and really smart people that are developing solutions for what all of you do every day. So it's important to stay on top of it. It's overwhelming. It's a lot, but it's pretty cool stuff. This is, we talk about for-profit competition, and I'm actually going to jump to this one. So I keep referencing that the not-for-profits have been behaving differently than the for-profits. And, you can see here very clearly that the pace of growth post-recession has been mostly dominated in the for-profit private sector. It's been largely independent living, largely assisted living. The not-for-profits have been relatively flat. Again, in terms of new location, they've been largely investing in existing campuses or expanding out with additional parcels of land. So it's just changing. So, certainly your markets each look a little different, but that's a trend line that we wanted to show there for sure. And again, almost half of that since 2005 has been the addition of assisted living and memory care. And then this is just occupancy. NIC also tracks occupancy. They'll give seniors housing. They break it out by assisted living, this is the CCRC occupancy, that you do see that the not-for-profit occupancy is above the for-profit. The one thing to point out as it relates to life plan communities is that the not-for-profits are generally an entry fee model, where the for-profits are more likely to adopt a rental model and not do that upfront entry fee as a contract option. Again, more of this detailed information is available through NIC. So I'm just going to wrap up here with just some brief comments, and then we'll allow about 5 minutes. If anybody has questions, I know you can type that in the chat box, and I'll do my best to respond. But, as it relates to capital and what's available, I mean, it's readily available, and quite frankly, at very competitive rates. Coming out of the recession, I mean, we were, the Fed was at 0% for how many years? I think almost 9 years. That obviously spawned a lot of the growth and availability of cheap capital in the private sector. So whether you're a for-profit or not-for-profit, the cost of capital remains very competitive. For not-for-profits, the tax bill, I'm not saying not just not-for-profits, but one of the things I want to speak to is there were some changes to tax-exempt financing in the new tax bill. So the elimination of advance refunding for private activity bonds. So your ability to take advantage of lower interest rates and reduce your cost is now limited. That will probably change how deals are structured in the future with call provisions. And then because the corporate tax rate has gone down, that in turn means for those of you with variable debt with banks, you likely have received a letter. If not, you may very soon or hear from your point person at the bank that your rates are going to be going up. And we have many providers who have gotten that retroactively back to January 1. So again, some changes in that. We anticipate the Federal Reserve will likely to continue their gradual rate increases as they have, the last 2 years. And then the one unknown is LIBOR, which there's a lot of language in deals around, comparing to LIBOR. And there's a proposed sunset of LIBOR means elimination of that. And I'm trying to even remember the date. I should remember that, but in a few years. So a lot of folks are trying to figure out how, LIBOR is often used as a bit of a benchmark or a standard of how different rates are calculated and compared. So that will also impact specific structuring deal provisions. If you have any questions, detailed information about capital, finances, what the markets look like, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to Ziegler, any of our team members, and we'd be glad to follow up with you. So that was a lot of talking for 55 minutes. I welcome any questions that you may have. I know we covered a lot of ground here, a lot of different things, but hopefully it was helpful for you. But I welcome any comments or questions if you want to type them in the chat box. And if not, again, you will receive a copy of a PDF of this PowerPoint so you can have my contact information. And I will tell you a lot of where these reports and information where this comes from is available on our website as well. So don't hesitate to go in and check out the Ziegler resources page. I'm not seeing any questions. So Susan, I can hand it back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. This was an amazing webinar. I know it's incredibly timely. I gained incredible amounts of information. I was taking notes fast and furiously. So thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to just remind everybody on the call that we've got other webinar series that will be coming up. On February 22, we're going to kick off our workforce series. And Lisa, you certainly did a nice job of talking about the challenges that are likely to be upon us with regards to staffing, recruitment, the cost of turnover, and so forth. But Robin Stone from Leading Age will provide an overview, continuing a little bit more on the theme that Lisa began to talk about, demographics, trends, and challenges of the workforce in elder care. That's February 22 at 3 o'clock. On March 22, our Best Life Dementia series, and I think, Lisa, you also hit that really nicely with the projected growth in memory care environments. Dr. Al Power, he's the author of Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease. We'll look at the experience of dementia through the frame of well-being. And he will join us on March 22nd, and that, again, is at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. Thank you, Lisa, once again, for your insights, your perspectives. The research that you've done is compelling. And to reiterate, a link to this webinar, along with Lisa's PDF presentation, will be sent out to you over the next day or so. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can check our website to find out more information about workshops and webinars. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon.